Hello, this is MovieMash Recapped. Today, I'll be explaining the German-American psychological thriller mystery picture Flight Plan. Warning, this contains spoilers. Be cautious and mindful. Kyle Pratt is having a difficult night. Kyle, an American engineer for aviation, lost her spouse in Berlin and is now a widow. Along with Julia, her 4-year-old daughter, she must board a plane to the United States with her husband's body. Kyle takes the medications that her doctor has recommended to her to aid with her anxiousness. When they wake up the following morning, it is snowing outside and a cab is ready to drive them to the airport. Julia becomes anxious when Kyle loses her at the airport. She sees adults, foreigners, couples, and strangers. However, no one child-sized. She turns around once more. Julia is standing next to a sundry stand. She tells her not to wander around without permission, sounding irate. In a little while, Kyle and Julia will board a jet that Kyle designed. They come into the cabin first. Julia peers out her window. Then she uses her breath to steam the window, and with her finger, she makes a tiny, awkward heart appear in the steam. After that, Kyle naps. When she wakes up from her snooze, she finds Julia has vanished from her seat. When Kyle approaches other travelers, none of them can remember seeing her. Julia may be playing with kids Julia's age, a flight attendant speculates. Trying to locate Julia, Kyle strolls down the aisle, but she is nowhere to be seen. Kyle keeps looking around, feeling a growing sense of anxiety. She looks over their row again where they had dozed out. She searches behind that blanket and discovers the bear with one arm. But Julia, no. That's peculiar. Julia would never leave her bear behind. In order to locate Julia, she next gets in touch with Stephanie, a flight attendant. After pledging to assist her, Stephanie announces the disappearance of a child. To her surprise, though, Stephanie informs her a moment later that her kid is not on the airplane. Kyle is perplexed. She tries to use her boarding card as evidence because she is positive her daughter was present. But Kyle can't seem to locate Julia's boarding pass. Moreover, she discovers that her daughter's rucksack is missing from the overhead bin, which is impossible for Julia to have done on her own because she is too short. Upon observing this circumstance, Gene Carson, a sky marshal, starts to keep an eye on her as she looks for her daughter. To include him in the hunt for her daughter, Kyle insists on seeing Captain Marcus Rich. The captain inquires as to whether Kyle is taking any medication at the moment after learning that her daughter is not on file for the flight. Kyle claims that she was using sleeping drugs to ease her distress brought on by her husband's passing. Kyle goes on to say that her husband passed just 6 days ago after falling from their roof. She doesn't think it was suicide. It is suspected by the captain and the other crew members that Kyle has turned insane following the death of her husband and has fantasized about bringing her daughter along. Kyle is adamant about searching for Julia from head to toe. Reluctantly, Captain Rich gives the order for the crew to conduct a thorough search. Inside the cabin, the lights are on. All passengers are told not to get up from their seats. Stephanie descends to the avionics area and searches the area, but there are still no girls in their fours. Pratt notices an Egyptian as she is occupied with her hunt. She recognizes him from somewhere and she approaches him. She tries to recollect, but at the moment her mind is too disorganized. The captain is then asked by Kyle to search the cargo hold for Julia. Captain Rich forbids that and furiously claims that hundreds of people are currently unattended on this aircraft since all flight attendants are occupied looking for a child that none of them think was ever on board. It doesn't sit well with Kyle. Then she dashes over to the Egyptian. Now that she can remember seeing him last night, peering into her daughter's bedroom, she accuses the man of stealing her daughter. The man displays confirmation of receipt from the motel where he resided, which is far from her flat, expressing his annoyance at being charged. And then everything goes crazy. The man is forced to confess by Kyle and they argue. Carson, who has had enough of her actions, claims that her husband's passing now makes more sense. After spending a few hours with her, even he feels like jumping. Julia was with her father when he fell off the roof and died of internal injuries, according to a wire sent to Captain Marcus shortly afterward from the Berlin hospital. At this point, the team thinks she's crazy. Indignantly, Kyle disputes it. She has no doubts that Julia is still on the plane and alive. Because Carson believes Kyle is a threat after fabricating this tale, he handcuffs Kyle and confines her to her seat. Kyle is approached by Lisa, a therapist, who tries to comfort her, making her question her own sanity. Her acceptance of her daughter's death has now begun. She later discovers, though, that the heart Julia had previously sketched on the window next to her seat is real. Kyle's conviction that something strange is happening grows. The therapist is then persuaded to allow her to use the bathroom. Rather than comply, she climbs the upper compartment and disables the oxygen masks and lights by hacking into the aircraft systems. While everyone on board, including the crew, begins to fear, Carson recognizes that Kyle is the one responsible. She takes use of the confusion to get to the lower goods deck via dumbwaiter. There, she discovers her husband's coffin. She opens David's coffin thinking Julia could be inside, but all she discovers is her husband's corpse. And not a single thing more. After locating her, Carson places her in handcuffs, guides her back, and notifies the pilot that there will be an emergency landing at Goose Bay Airport, where she will be detained. One of the passengers starts to applaud as she is being led to her seat. The applause spread, filling the deck. The Egyptian is among the others who are staring at her. When Kyle gets to the back row, she stops and takes a seat. Kyle begs Carson one last time to search the aircraft when it lands. After giving it some thought, Carson chooses to talk to the captain. But he slips down to the goods deck instead of talking to the captain. There, he takes out a detonator and 2 explosives that were hidden in Kyle's spouse David's coffin. After that, he descends to the avionics area and secures the explosives to the platform side, exposing Julia, who is sound asleep. It becomes clear at this time that Carson was the brains behind everything. Because Julia knew about the jet, Carson and Stephanie planned to take over the aircraft and use her knowledge to frame Kyle. They kidnapped Julia and forced her to open the casket containing the explosives and detonator. The airline needs to transfer $50 million into a bank account, or else Carson informs the captain that Kyle is a hijacker and threatens to blow up the plane. Then, a terrified Stephanie is informed by Carson that he plans to blow up the jet, murdering Julia while she is unconscious and leaving Kyle dead with the detonator in her hand. As the jet is about to land, Kyle, who is still in shock over all that has happened, nervously peers out the window. The emergency landing has confused other travelers. The passengers get off the aircraft after landing. When Kyle approaches the captain as he is leaving, he angrily claims that the ransom has been paid. This confuses Kyle. She quickly understands that Carson is to blame for everything. He distorts the facts by taking advantage of the circumstances to make Kyle appear to be a terrorist. After realizing this, Kyle decides to play the part of the hijacker and gives the order for Carson to stay on board and the crew to depart. Carson is hesitant, but he knows that if he doesn't comply, it will be assumed that he is the one pulling the hoax. The moment the jet door closes, Kyle uses a fire extinguisher to knock Carson out, shackles him to a rail, and removes the explosive from his pocket. Stephanie emerges from cover. Carson comes to. Shooting until she locks herself in the cockpit, he pursues Kyle. To trick him, she unlocks a hatch door to the attic of the plane and tosses out a binder. When Carson hears the thud upstairs, he moves out. As Kyle leaves, he sees Stephanie, who is overcome with guilt. When she gets punched, she panics and leaves the plane right away. As Kyle searches the avionics for her daughter, she discovers Julia there, unconscious. She carries her and gives her a quick embrace. Soon after, Carson follows and confesses, while searching, that he killed her husband in order to slip explosives into his coffin, knowing that the casket would not be inspected at the checkpoint. As soon as Kyle gets Julia into the non-combustible hold of the aeroplane, Carson shoots at her while she locks the door. Kyle is holding the detonator. She sets off the explosives, causing the plane to explode and killing Carson, using the non-flammable walls of the hold as protection. Shocked, the crew and passengers watch the explosion. Kyle shows up a moment later with her daughter. Upon realizing that Kyle had been telling the truth the entire time, all of the passengers are stunned as Kyle brings her daughter out onto the tarmac. At the airport terminal the following morning, Captain Rich walks up to Kyle and expresses his regret for his mistrust. The FBI leads Stephanie away in handcuffs and tells them that the director of the Berlin mortuary has also been taken into custody, according to an agent. Julia is carried by Kyle through the throng of travelers who come to terms with reality. Everyone is in disbelief and feels a little guilty about not believing her. They prepare to depart and Julia asks drowsily, "Are we there yet?" before she wakes up and loads her daughter into a vehicle to drive them away. In a gesture of forgiveness and respect, the Egyptian passenger assists her in picking up her bag in the last scene. That concludes the film flight plan. To support the channel, please turn on notifications, subscribe for more videos like this, and leave likes.